The first time I realized something was wrong was the morning I heard hammers echoing through the quiet valley behind my house. At first, I thought the sound was coming from a neighbor's property, maybe someone putting up a new shed. But then I noticed something that made my blood pressure spike faster than a rattlesnake in July. The noise wasn't coming from any neighbor's land. It was coming from mine. I stood on my back porch, coffee steaming in my hand, staring across the boundary line where my 20 acres of woodland sloped gently toward a small creek I'd always loved. That creek had been my retreat for years. It was where I fished, where my late wife and I used to sit on warm evenings, her head on my shoulder as we watched dragonflies skim the surface. That land was my peace. So when I saw men in bright vests hauling lumber, drilling, digging, and pacing around like they owned the place, I set my coffee cup down so fast it sloshed over the rim. I marched down the hill toward the noise, my boots crunching through the dry leaves. As I got closer, I saw posts in the ground, freshly poured concrete forming the outline of what looked like a pavilion. A pavilion. On my land. And the cherry on top? A smug-looking man wearing a laminated badge that said HOA President. "Morning," he said, barely glancing at me as he waved a clipboard. "You're standing in a restricted work zone, sir. Please move back." I stared at him, nearly certain I'd misheard. "A restricted what? This is my land you're on." He gave me a look like I'd just told him the moon was made of cheese. "Actually," he said, flipping through his papers, "according to our association survey, this area belongs to the Ridgeview Lakeside Community HOA." I let out a laugh that wasn't really a laugh at all. "I'm not in your HOA. Never have been. My deed predates this entire development." He shrugged with the confidence of a man who had never been punched hard enough in life to learn humility. "We're expanding our amenities. This will be a community use pavilion. You'll be receiving a notice today about the encroachment the other way around." Encroachment. He was accusing me of encroaching on my own land. I took a breath. Then another. The old me, the younger me, would have exploded like a powder keg. But life teaches you to pick your battles, and when a fool hands you a legal battle you can win, you take it slowly. Carefully. Quietly. Because revenge is always better when the other person never sees it coming. So instead, I smiled. "You folks go right ahead," I said. "I'll take care of it." The president beamed like he'd just won the lottery. "Good choice. Glad we understand each other." Oh, we understood each other perfectly. He thought he'd bulldoze my rights. He had no idea I had the bigger bulldozer. I walked back to my house, sat at my dining table, pulled out my deed, my original survey, and every scrap of paper that proved what I had known since the day I bought the place. That ridge, that creek, and the entire valley behind it belonged to me, and only me. The HOA's boundary stopped a full 73 feet before the creek. 5 days later, they'd built nearly half the pavilion. Posts, beams, a partial roof. Hell, they even had a sign drafted that said Ridgeview Family Retreat Pavilion. I saw the mock-up on their website. They bragged about it like they'd bought the land with their personal savings. That was the moment I made the call. "Yeah," I said into the phone. "I need a bulldozer for a day. The big one." The man on the other end laughed. "What are you flattening? A house?" Something like that. The next morning, I drove that bright yellow beast right to the edge of the tree line. The workers scattered like startled chickens. The HOA president came running, red in the face, waving his arms like I was steering a tank into a nursery. "What do you think you're doing?" he shrieked. "Reclaiming my property," I said, and revved the engine. "You can't do this," he shouted. "You'll be fined." "I'm not in your HOA," I reminded him. "You can't destroy community property." I gestured at the structure. That's called trespassing. And you're lucky I'm using a machine instead of a lawyer right now." He started dialing 911. I let him. I had nothing to hide. I took the bulldozer forward slowly, savoring every inch. The first wooden post snapped like a toothpick. The roof sagged and collapsed like a bad idea, and that's exactly what it had been. Within 20 minutes, the pavilion was nothing but a neat pile of rubble. I pushed it all back over their imaginary boundary line and parked the bulldozer right on top of it. The cops arrived moments after the dust settled. The HOA president sprinted toward them, shouting, "Arrest him! Arrest him now!" 2 officers walked over to me instead. "Sir," one said, "what happened here?" I calmly handed them my deed, survey, and boundary plat. They built on my land, after I told them not to. The officers studied the documents, then looked toward the HOA president. "Sir," one officer said, "everything he told you was correct. Your association has no jurisdiction on this property." The president went pale. But the survey." The officer held up a hand. "Your survey is wrong. His is original and legally binding. You're trespassing." The HOA board members had gathered behind him. Their faces looked like a lineup of people who'd realized they'd bet their retirement funds on a losing horse. As the officers lectured them on property rights and trespassing laws, I simply leaned against a bulldozer, arms folded. I didn't smile, didn't gloat. Life had already taught me that people who dig their own holes don't need your help shoveling. But I wasn't done. A week later, I filed a civil claim. Not out of anger, but principle. My land wasn't just acres of dirt. It held memories. My wife's laughter still echoed between those trees. And they trampled that without respect, without permission, and without care. The court date came faster than anyone expected. I walked into the courtroom in jeans and a clean shirt. The HOA board marched in wearing suits that probably cost more than the education they clearly never received. The judge listened patiently as their lawyer painted me as some sort of anti-community troublemaker. Then he asked me to show my deed. I did. He asked their lawyer for theirs. He hesitated. His hesitation was everything. The judge ruled in my favor so fast the gavel practically smoked. The HOA had trespassed, illegally built on private land, ignored warnings, and attempted to intimidate a man who had every legal right to defend his property. The damages they owed me? $187,000. Enough to honor my wife's memory. Enough to secure my retirement. Enough to remind them that arrogance always has a price. When I walked out of the courtroom, the HOA president approached me. He wasn't smug anymore. He wasn't even angry. He looked defeated. "Why didn't you just tell us sooner?" he asked. I put my hands in my pockets. "I did." He nodded. "Fair. And here's something else," I said calmly. "Next time you think you own something, make sure your paperwork matches your confidence." He didn't have a comeback. Sometimes silence is the loudest apology. I went home that afternoon and walked to the creek. The air was crisp. The water moved gently over the rocks. In the distance, I could still see a few splintered boards from the pavilion they tried to steal from the earth that didn't belong to them. I sat on the same log where my wife and I used to sit. I could almost imagine her voice in the breeze saying, You did the right thing." Maybe I didn't flatten their egos that day with the bulldozer. Maybe life did that for them. But I did protect what mattered. Not the money, not the land, but the principle that what's yours is yours, and no board, no president, no committee, and no loudmouth clipboard warrior gets to take that away. A month later, I received a letter. The HOA wanted to formally apologize and open communication for future cooperation. I tossed it straight into the trash. Some bridges aren't worth rebuilding, especially when they were built on your property without permission. Since then, a few neighbors have asked me if I have regrets. If maybe I went too far. If maybe I should have let them have that tiny slice of land. I always say the same thing. It's not about land. It's about respect. And respect, once broken, is harder to rebuild than any pavilion. Some nights, when the moon rises over the ridge and the air carries that soft, familiar whisper of memories, I sit by the creek and think about how life gives you battles you didn't ask for. And sometimes, the only way to win is to climb into the bulldozer, literally or metaphorically, and push forward until the path is clear again. Because protecting what's yours isn't selfish. It's honorable. And some people only learn the value of boundaries when you draw them with a blade of steel and an engine that doesn't back down.